We're not all maturity wise in the same place, even though our bodies are bigger and we own homes and, we're taller and, like we're full-fledged adults with adolescent minds and, adolescent behaviors sometimes, and even, quite childish behaviors sometimes. And if we could just recognize in people that their experiences and willingness to work through those things really impact how they're able to respond to you is important.
Hello, I'm Nina Westbrook, and this is the Do Tell Relationship Podcast. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, a relationship expert, and a generally curious person fascinated by exploring the many ways we connect with one another. I'm here to guide you through the twists and turns of navigating your relationships with authenticity and compassion. Join me as we dive into candid conversations with health experts, celebrities, and overall interesting people, exploring their philosophies on relationships, life, wellness, and making a lasting impact. So grab your favorite beverage, cozy up, and let's explore what truly matters in life. Welcome to the Do Tell Relationship Podcast, where every episode is an invitation to deepen your connections and live your most authentic life. Let's get into it. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Do Tell Relationship Podcast. I'm really excited about today's guest. We have Nedra Glover Tawwab, who is huge on social media. She is a licensed therapist and she's also a relationship expert. And I feel like we have so much in common. So I'm very excited. I read on her website that she's really into minding her own business, which is perfect. I love that for me and for everyone else. And the other thing I think we really connect on is boundaries. She's a huge stickler on boundaries. And I feel like a lot of people, we hear the word boundaries a lot, but I don't think that we really understand how much they impact us in our everyday lives and in so much that we do. And honestly, if you don't have good, healthy boundaries and you don't maintain them, it has a significant impact on your emotional well-being. So I'm really excited to chat with her about all the things that I really love and all the things that are so important to me as well. So we are going to start out with taking some questions from all of our listeners. And Megan, do you want to share the first question before Nedra pops in?
Yeah, we do. We have a couple of questions from the audience, and I'm so excited to hear from Nedra as well. But here's one to kind of kick us off, which is, do you have any advice on when you love your partner, but you don't love their friends?
That's a really good question. I feel like we've all been there before, where we are maybe dating someone or married to someone and we don't necessarily gel particularly well with their friends, and that's okay. I think that, like with anything else that we kind of deal with in our lives, we have to create, boundaries in our relationships and figure out what works well with us and what doesn't. And that's why communication plays a huge part in this type of scenario. So it's kind of difficult to speak to every example, but just overall and in general, you have to have, you have to communicate with your partner, because why don't you like their friends?
Right. How do you say that nicely?
No, I mean, is their friend making you uncomfortable? Is their friend being inappropriate? These are some of the more important things that I feel can cause a little bit more tension. But if these are circumstances that are happening, then I feel like you and your partner need to be engaged in trying to figure out what's happening. And if this is even someone that both of you should be friends with, right? So like there are different levels, I think, to, you know, whether you like a friend, your partner's friend. If your partner's friend is just loud and obnoxious sometimes, like we can learn to overcome that in certain circumstances and scenarios, right? That might mean hanging out with your friend and your partner and their friend in small doses. It could also look like not hanging out and letting your partner and being respectful of your partner going to spend time with that friend alone, and they can have their quality time while you sit back and do something on your own. So it kind of just depends on the reason why we don't like someone or we don't get along with our partner's friends. And communicating with your partner what that is, and then hopefully being able to like tackle that type of conversation or conflict together with the friend. Maybe you talking to the friend directly might not be received as well, but if you and your partner can be on the same team, and kind of work together to best share your feelings with the friend and in hopes of finding some type of resolution or compromise, like in any kind of relationship, I think would be good.
Yeah. So communicate and then figure out how to communicate that to the friend or resolve the conflict together.
Resolve together. Yes.
The whole idea.
That's a great question.
I love that one too.
How about have you been in any situations where you might not like be thrilled with a partner's friends?
Me? You know, I like everybody. You know me.
This is true.
You know me. No, people pleaser number one over here, which we need to do a whole episode on apparently. But no, I think we've all been there where there's somebody that's just not your cup of tea.
Yeah.
And you have to be careful about how you communicate that to your partner. And sometimes it's family too. It's not just friends. And that's even more sensitive.
Exactly. And that's why the boundaries, and which is why I can't wait. We should ask Nedra this question.
Yes, we should.
Later.
Okay.
Next question.
Next question we did get from an audience member was the 7-year itch. Is it real?
Okay. The 7-year itch. We are each growing and changing. If we're on a wellness journey and we want to become better people, we're always and constantly learning, taking in new information. Our environment is constantly changing. Our stage of life is changing. We could be entering into like parenthood, or we could be starting new careers or changing careers or pivoting, whatever the case may be. There are so many circumstances throughout our lives that change and then therefore change us consistently. I always like to say that the one thing that is truly consistent and throughout our lives is change. And so when you're in a relationship where you feel that things have become a little repetitive and you're feeling like you want a fresh change or something new, I think that's really interesting. But I feel like it's totally possible for you to have like a 7-year itch or however many year itch at any point in your relationship. I think that the way you tackle that time or those feelings is really important. Communication is always key. And I think that whenever there's something that pressing going on in your mind, like exploring, like being bored or wanting to explore, try new things, thinking through that process and thinking through what that means for you and what that looks like for you is so important, because you don't want to make any rash decisions that might feel good at the time, or changes that might feel good at the time that don't really align with what your goals are for yourself or for your relationship. And so thinking things through in that time and communicating with your partner, communicating with a third party, whatever the case may be, I think is a really healthy way of working through that 7-year itch and just coming up with a plan and figuring out how you can switch things up and change things up or spice things up in the relationship, in the bedroom, whatever the case may be. I think a 7-year itch or however many year itch, I think for different people in different relationships, it comes at different times. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think what's important there is kind of not focusing on outside of yourself. Like, is there another person or another thing that's going to fulfill this itch or scratch this itch? But is it, what can I be doing internally, right? It's like self-reflection, because I think we sometimes think something outside of us is going to it's going to scratch it. And it's, do you know what I'm saying? I mean,
like the little back scratcher, the little thing outside of yourself that's
the easy. Like, you kind of want to just go and grab something outside of you to be like, okay, this feels better for a little bit, versus assessing, why am I feeling bored?
Right.
Why is this not spicy for me anymore?
Exactly.
And what does spicy look like for me right now? And it might be different.
Exactly. I really like that. Because what that does when you kind of take ownership over those feelings and your expectations of what you think things should be like, you're really, it's really empowering, because you learn that you really do have way more control over your thought process and your actions and your behaviors than you think, right? So I feel like that's a really good approach. Figure out like what's going on, like all of these things are happening externally, but what's happening internally, and start there.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Last question
for today. Somebody wrote in saying that they have no idea where they want to live or what career they want to choose, and they feel paralyzed with fear that they're going to make the wrong choice or waste time or waste money. So the question is, how do you start to find clarity when you're kind of scared to make that next step?
Right. That's a really good question. Well, there are a few things here that I want to touch on. I think that, first of all, these are all very common things that we experience whenever we are looking to start something new or change things up. That fear. I like to think of fear as being not necessarily a negative thing all of the time. I think it could be a positive thing, because we're always going to have a little bit of fear. We're always going to have a little bit of nerves, right? Around changing something or going for something bigger or following our dreams. There's always like a little bit of uncomfortable feelings that go with that. And to me, that means you're headed in the right direction. Right. It means that, that's your body telling you that you're ready for more or something new or something different, and to figure out how to utilize that fear and turn it into something that resembles fuel, right? Use that fear as fuel to push you forward into the next chapter of your life. And I feel like when you're unsure of exactly what you can do or what you want to do, that means it's time to be curious. It's time to explore. It's time to dibble and dabble and this and that. Talk to your friends, talk to your family, and figure out, you just have to try things, learn, educate yourself as much as you can on whatever it is that you want to explore, and figure out, how does this feel when you're learning about it, or when you are discovering the new things that you might want to pursue. I remember for me, like even when I was in college, I didn't feel like I was going to school. It didn't feel like a chore to me. Like I was so excited to go to class to learn about the thing that I loved. And I feel like once you have those feelings and once you feel that passion for what you do, it doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like work all of the time, because some things are hard, and challenging, and it's like, oh my goodness. But for me, that's what it felt like going through the process of learning about the thing I loved, which is therapy.
So it's almost like you kind of figured out that thing you loved and clarity came because as you were doing it, you felt at peace, like this is where I need to be, or you were excited by it.
Right. And I think being confident and understanding and knowing that we all kind of go through these different changes and challenges, and it's very normal, but also anything that you choose to do, once you choose and commit to it, you're going to learn, you're going to get better. It's the process, and this is how things go. And you have to be uncomfortable and or a little bit first. I wish that we could all kind of start off as experts in something. How would that?
It's not how the world works.
No, it's not how the world works. But if you stay committed and you practice and you put in the work, then you're going to get better. You have no choice but to get better. This is great. I love that. I feel like this is a good stopping place because I think Nedra is probably here soon and is going to join us in the studio. I'm really excited to have Nedra Glover Tawwab in studio. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah. So you are a licensed therapist, a social worker, a relationship expert, a podcast host, a best-selling author. When do you sleep?
Oh my gosh. Well, hopefully for 8 hours between 10 and 6-ish.
I'm actually really excited to talk to you because I love talking about relationships, since here we are. Mm-hmm. And also I'm a huge, huge advocate of having healthy boundaries. It seems so simple, and I feel like people... I would say I really take advantage of the fact that I have learned and grown to really be really good at setting healthy boundaries. I feel like I had to go through a lot to get there, but you talk about setting healthy boundaries and minding your own business, which these things just make me so happy. And if we could all set boundaries and mind our own business, like the world would be, how much better would the world be?
I think it's thought of as a simple practice, but I think of setting boundaries as scrambling an egg. Not everybody gets it right. Mm-hmm. Seems very simple, right? You crack the egg, either you whip it up in a bowl or you stir it a lot in a pan, and then sometimes people just don't make good eggs. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things that we have to practice to get better at, and it's going to be unique for our experience. Right. So with boundaries, it's really hard to take Nina's boundaries and say, oh, you know what? These are now my boundaries. I'm going to do all the things that she's doing. Well, we all need to think about them differently and what we need in this moment.
I 100% agree. And I feel like, honestly, it's like you said, it sounds so simple, but so many of us struggle and have such a difficult time, not just like understanding our boundaries. We know the things that make us tick a lot of the times, and we know when we're tired. We know when we're overwhelmed, or when we don't want to go to this event or that event or this birthday party. But I think the real struggle for a lot of people comes in when it's time to actually like uphold the boundaries. That's the second part, which I think is the most important part. How do we get there? Like, how do we, aside from time, because practice makes semi-perfect, right? With practice, we gain confidence, and the ability to maintain and set boundaries becomes a lot easier over time. But when you're not there yet, and time is, you're just getting into it. How do you have any tips, any practical tips for being able to, because there's so many layers to it, I feel like, and so many reasons why people have challenges with maintaining those boundaries.
I don't know if, because of your background, like as a therapist, do you ever look at your kids and get lots of life lessons and see the psychology playing out? And it's like, Freud was right, or whatever, right? For my oldest daughter, I noticed that she gets so frustrated when people don't listen to her. At her birthday party, she's going to end up in the bathroom crying. When her friends come over, it's like, I told them they needed to clean up after them. So she gets so frustrated when people don't listen. And I think about how frustrating it is for me still when people don't listen. Now, I don't cry. I don't, stop talking to people, but I get very frustrated. But with practice, we get a little tougher at tolerating people not listening to us, maybe the first time or the second time. We figure out how to say things in a different way. Now, she's a child. Right? Already practicing this. The more that she does that, the better she'll be able to regulate her response when this same sort of thing happens. For some of us, we haven't started doing that in childhood. We didn't do that. Right? So, you have some folks who are 25, 45, and this is their first experience with, oh my gosh, they're not listening to me. And I said this thing, and it's, it's like this falling apart. And it's like, keep on practicing. People have their own agenda. And I get that it's really hard. But, the big tip is to not try to look for a hack. Because sometimes we're like, how do I easily do this thing? What's the 5-step process for setting a boundary with a hard person? It's like saying it to them. And then after that, you might want to have yourself a cup of tea, call your therapist, call your best friend, go do a workout or whatever makes you feel good. Because if they don't like it, or if they reject it, or they yell at you, it doesn't mean that you did a bad thing.
Right.
It just means they didn't like it.
Right. I think that's so important because so often, we can set a boundary. And I find that when people don't respect their own boundaries, they have a hard time. Like, how can you expect them to respect your boundaries when they don't have boundaries themselves, right? And so I think that we have a hard time with the fallout from that. And for me, I've learned to be content with the fact that I was able to do and say and be who I wanted. And that's what makes me happy. That's what brings me happiness. So regardless of the fallout, or regardless of the consequence or the results, I'm able to be confident and happy with the decision that I've made because I haven't stepped outside of what I want. But when you're dealing with friends or family, coworkers who just don't respect your boundaries, and there's a lot of conflict, but you have to kind of be in that space. Like, how do you cope and manage when you're not being heard?
You issue a consequence. I think consequences are challenging because sometimes they punish us. To say to someone, your behavior is so disruptive to the group that you're no longer invited to this group thing. That means that we'll miss
hurtful.
them. Right? So it's like,
yeah, I really want you here.
I really want you here.
But you can't come. And it's hurting me that you can't be here because I want you to have fun with us.
Yeah, but you don't seem to be able to have fun. You seem to, create a lot of chaos or, do these things that actually cause a big disruption.
Right.
So in some ways, we don't want to issue that consequence because we have to deal with the burden of, I miss them, they're upset at me. And so the consequence is, certainly one way. I think another way that you issue a boundary with a difficult person is to figure out what you can do, not what you need them to do. A lot of times with boundaries, we're like, okay, you need to do this thing. And sometimes it's really about what can I do to execute my boundary with this person. Right. Because this person may not be willing to change. So, I think of the example of you always have, everybody has this person in their life that's like always late. You may not want to end the relationship with that person, but do you fudge the start time?
You do. I do.
You do. Yeah. I found that with some people, I'll give them a big task, like, you got to pick the cake up and it has to be here before that'll get a person on time. Like, okay, I have an important job, so I will try harder to be there on time. So there are different ways that we can help people with honoring our boundaries, but it's not always them doing the thing. It's okay. So I may not want to do this thing with this person, so here's a hard thing that I might have to do.
Right.
I think of folks who say, how do I get my family to stop gossiping about me? How do they know the stuff? That means you got to stop telling Aunt so-and-so certain things.
Mm-hmm.
We can't expect a person who wants to tell everyone in the family your
Right.
secrets to keep a secret.
Right.
It's like, don't tell them. And they should be able to. They can't.
Mm-hmm.
They can't. And so what do you do in that situation? You have the power to decide, do I want to tell this information sharer my information?
Right.
You may need to keep it to yourself, or, tell someone who can hold that.
Right. I appreciate that so much, because a lot of the time it's so empowering when you look at your life and your relationships and understand that that they can be what you want them to be, right? Mm-hmm. If you focus on the things that you can do and how you can change in order to change the relationship, because relationships can change even if one person changes. It doesn't take two people. Mm-hmm. Which is why therapy, whether it's couples or individual, one person in a system can go to therapy and change the entire system. Whether the other people in the system like the change or not, it's the change that makes the person who's in therapy feel better and happier and more content with their life and their boundaries and their situation. So I think that's really great. And it's so important to note for me always, because I think a lot of the time we feel helpless about the things that are happening around us, but a change in our own behaviors can totally shift things for us. So
to that point, it makes me think of a question that I often get about couples and families. Like, can I go to therapy without my partner? Can I go to therapy without my mom? And it's like, yeah, because the therapy is for you. And sometimes we go into couples counseling and we go into family counseling with the idea of, if this therapist hears the story, they'll make this person change. And it's like, that's not necessarily true. Mm-hmm. The biggest change can happen with you individually, and you can go to therapy and it could be wonderful for your relationships, or, you could wait for your family to go and
put all the cards in that basket.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I always like to say, we're in charge of our own path, our own happiness, our own ability to be content. And by doing that and figuring out how we can be happy in a space or in a relationship, it can change the trajectory of the relationship. So it's so important. A lot of that work requires a lot of self-awareness, which you talk about often on social media. Anyone who follows you knows you talk about self-awareness. And again, minding your own business, which is great. Can you speak to me a little bit more about how having emotional intelligence can impact our relationships?
Well, I think having a certain level of emotional intelligence makes us a bit more empathetic, understanding, introspective. And when some of us don't have the I don't want to say high, because I don't want a ranking of it, right? Mm-hmm. But when some of us are not emotionally equipped, we are defensive. Mm-hmm. We do have low self-awareness. We do have some blamey sort of tendencies and some, harsh behaviors toward others. And, it's something that we have to be willing to build. Mm-hmm. Often when engaging with people, it can be really helpful for us to think about not their actual age, but their emotional age. Mm. Because I'll hear people say, but they're 40.
They should know.
She's acting real 12. Mm-hmm. She's acting 12. I look at some folks' behaviors and I'm like, wow, I've seen this with, some of the 15-year-olds that I've worked with. This is, very characteristic of adolescence.
Right.
So we're not all maturity-wise in the same place, even though our bodies are bigger and we own homes and, we're taller and, we're full-fledged adults with adolescent minds and, adolescent behaviors sometimes, and even, quite childish behaviors sometimes. And if we could just recognize in people that their experiences and willingness to work through those things really impact how they're able to respond to you is important.
Right.
So be it your boss, be it your partner, be it your friend, it's not necessarily true that they are acting their age.
Right. But it takes a lot of emotional intelligence and clarity to be able to look at a situation or look at a person and have that empathy and compassion for that person and kind of meeting them where they're at is what it sounds like you're describing.
So there are times where you can consider someone's situation, and we do that, and sometimes too much. We're like, oh my gosh, their parents are divorced, and when they were 4 they had to ride on this thing and blah, blah. We have a whole story of why it's okay for people to mistreat us. And all of those things may contribute to why they mistreat you, but you also shouldn't be mistreated repeatedly by the same person in the same way all the time.
Okay, so do you find that there is a specific event or time or emotion that we might experience when it's time to just cut someone loose? And I hate that terminology, but sometimes we have to make difficult decisions that, like you said, they end up hurting us as well, which is why we kind of let things go on.
I think when we're thinking about it, is worth exploring. When you start thinking like, could my life be better without this person? Oh, this is worth exploring. That's the time to, maybe have some journaling exercises and really explore, because what you might think is the worst possible outcome could be the best possible outcome. There are sometimes, people who you may have around you that can't be in an elevated space with you. They can't be, your friend when you become married. They can't be in your life when you're outside of high school, so there are certain people where you may need to say, it would be really sad to not have this relationship. I don't know, say with your dad, but is it possible that it could also be something that enhances your life? That's the thing that we don't think about, that the stress of the relationship sometimes is so overwhelming. I remember one time I was in therapy and I was talking about a family member, and my therapist was like, it sounds like you just emotionally prepare so much to see this person. I said, you know what?
Oh, wow.
Because it was a lot. It was like, I got to do this and then this, and I need to take a bath, and I got to do all this.
And figure out, thinking about what all the potential outcomes could be from the meeting.
They could do this, so I have to do it was like a
lot of work.
I was planning a Grammys.
A lot of energy. Too much.
It was too much energy. And I was like, who else do I do that for? And it's like, no one. I just see them. I'm like, it's not like this whole path of things I have to do. So sometimes we have to think about that. I was speaking a few weeks ago and I was saying to someone, I think when I became a parent, my capacity for chaos significantly decreased. Like, I don't know. Like, I used to like a little... Even with what I watched on TV, like I liked a little commotion and, just a lot going on. But it seems like once you just have to take care of someone all day, it's like if I don't get quiet everywhere else.
Your tolerance is low.
It's like a 1.5.
Yeah, I
out of 100.
Not agree more. And then you don't care. Like the guilt that maybe existed before, it just goes away.
Yeah, I'm like, I can't do this and raise a human and shower daily. Like, these are just things I can't balance anymore. So if you can figure out a way to calmly enter my mental space, that's fine. But if you're creating a lot of chaos, I don't have room. I don't have room anymore.
Right.
I think it helped me prioritize a bit. And I know for all of us that doesn't happen. We still try to keep all the relationships and all the things, and we're frazzled. And I see that as very detrimental to us. That as we do more things, if we get a promotion, we should be doing less in other areas. We shouldn't do as much as we did before with the promotion.
Right.
You know, if we become a parent, we shouldn't be doing as much as we did before. Like, something in your life has to shift to create some sort of harmony.
I love what you're saying so much. I like to refer to it as kind of like an organized chaos in terms of, let me explain that, because the word chaos can be a little scary. For me, finding a way to prioritize the things that are most important at that time. And like at the top of my list is always faith and family, you know, faith, husband, kids. And then the thing that comes next can move around a little bit. So some things in our lives might need more attention than others at different points of our lives, at different points of the week, of month, year, whatever the case may be. But being able to recognize when those changes need to be made, or even with raising kids, you know, some of my kids, it's so crazy that I say some of my kids, not they. It's like I have so many of them that I say some of them, but some are okay. Like there's always one or two that are like solid. They're happy, thriving emotionally. We're not having fits every day. And then there's always one. They can never all be thriving at the same time. So there's always one that requires a little bit more of my attention, affection, whatever, quality time. And just understanding and having that awareness of where your attention is best, you know, is most needed, and prioritizing that at different phases and times is a good way to try to balance all the things that are happening. And so I feel like this is a good segue. We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to talk to Nedra about how she maintains her peace and how she resets. If you're enjoying this episode, make sure to follow us on social media at Do Tell Podcast for more behind-the-scenes footage and clips. Visit us on benebynina.com for exclusive e-workshops, wellness guides, fitness and nutrition resources, and my Do Tell conversation card game, all created to encourage a lifetime of growth, inspiration, and personal development. If you want to hear more episodes like this one, subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, where you will find all of my past episodes and interviews with other incredible guests. Like we talked about before, you are doing so many things. First of all, where can everyone follow you on social media? Because it's really great to watch all of your videos.
I am on all platforms as Nedra Tawwab.
Okay.
If you put in NED, I promise my name will pop up. I am.
Ooh, I love that.
It's not a common name, right?
I mean, no.
Yeah.
No, but I love that. Yes. If you're not already following Nedra, please follow her on social media. You're doing your podcast. You're doing everything. You have a new book out. How do you find time, besides sleeping for 8 hours at night, which is incredible? How do you find time to, like, how do you find peace, and how do you find time to reset?
I watch a lot of TV. Like, I don't even know how I have enough time to watch the amount of TV that I watch, but I really find it to be a wonderful distraction. So I have my shows that I watch, and I love movies.
Okay.
So,
do you cry?
Depending on the movie, yes.
Okay.
Oh, The Color Purple, I cried for sure.
Okay. This is insane. I feel like we have so much in common. I love a good show.
I love shows. I love movies. If I could go to the movie theater once a week, that would be ideal. Like in December, I almost did it. I went for 3 weeks straight and I was like, darn it, I can't find one more movie. But I really enjoy television and movies.
Okay.
I find it really important to connect socially.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's having, a get together with friends or, going to visit a friend, having tea or coffee with a friend, it's really restorative to talk to other people about nothing and stuff, right? Because there's something about that connection that we have with other people that's just really important. And I know sometimes you may feel like, oh, I don't have time. And I'm like, I just make time, whether it's, hey, you want to start doing a Pilates class together, or, hey, I have some new teas. You want to come over and have a little makeshift tea party, whatever that thing is. I enjoy connecting with people. Recently, I've been really into arranging flowers. So,
that's fun.
Oh, yes. So I have about 2 friends who are really into it. So it's like a little text group. It's like, look what I made this week. I got this, and this.
That's really sweet.
I went to a floral arranging class and, it just feels really good to be bad at something new. So allowing myself to be a learner of something, because sometimes you could think, oh, I am so great. Yeah, you've been practicing this thing for 15 years, but what can you do that's new?
Right.
How can you be corrected?
Right.
So this is an opportunity for me to figure out, like, okay, you do this, and oh, you have to trim the stems of this, and oh, this is, like, oh, that's how you water a hydrangea. It's like learning something new has been really helpful. And then also, reading. I read a lot.
That's
good.
A lot
of books.
I mean, a lot of what you're saying, I feel like most of what you're saying is totally relatable. I think when people think, I hate using the word self-care now, just because I think a lot of people have this idea that it's this grandiose thing, like it has to be this big thing. When a lot like you, my self-care includes watching Housewives.
I have found the reality shows, be it Love and Hip Hop or Real Housewives of whatever city, it is a wonderful distraction for people. Like I hear people say that so much, just to be outside. It's like reading a juicy novel, right? Like,
I was going to say, I think people we love to be witnessing somebody else's drama. Yeah, we don't want our drama.
She messy. Like, please, no, don't call me with any drama. But I love her mess.
We get to live through their drama and not have to have it for ourselves.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think that simple things like that, watching movies, just taking time to just sit and do nothing and just let your mind rest is so important. And then that idea of connecting with friends and family and people that you love, being vulnerable. Do you ever feel like, because you are who you are, when you are connecting with friends and family, does it ever feel not like therapy, but like you are there and you're listening and you're wanting to share or help or give advice or whatever the case may be? Does it ever feel like not like a typical normal conversation with a friend?
Not so much anymore. I think my boundaries have gotten better with that. I think earlier in my career, I used to be so frustrated because I was like being a therapist. And really no one was asking me to. It was me just self-imposing the role. Like, I know what you should do in this situation. And now I take the approach of, what would a friend do? You know, how do I listen as a friend? I don't need to analyze this situation. I don't need to bring up, well, yeah, when you were in ninth grade, I don't need to bring up anything from, you know, a psychosocial history and, you know, this person, that thing. I really sit with them as a friend. And it's an exchange, which it is not like that with a client. I'm not like, oh, do you remember that one? I don't do that.
Right.
And so this relationship is very different. And there are some people who may expect me to be in that listener role, and those conversations get shorter over time. It's like, you know, I have 20 minutes. I don't have an hour anymore. I'm not doing a full session.
Right.
You know, I can listen for 15 and then I got to go.
Right.
So you figure out, you know, what those boundaries are, because sometimes people do need you to listen to them. Because what I find with most people with our background is we were led down this path for a reason.
Right.
You know, it is something about us that says you can talk to them.
And we've been doing it our whole lives anyways.
Yes. You've been asking questions. And, you know, you know, a lot of times when I'm talking to people, I'm like, this would be a good question. I just let it float. I don't always say it, you know, but I'm like, I wonder have they, but it's not always my place to say, well, do you think this is connected to, I'm not your therapist. Now, this might be some wonderful Instagram content. Let me put this note in my phone of what I was thinking. I'm like, I might have to write it in a book, but I don't need to say it to you. Because that's not my role in this moment. My role right now is to be at a bachelorette party. It's not to analyze
everything that's happening.
Why you didn't want a stripper?
Bachelor.
I'm like, why wouldn't she? You know, that's not my job right now.
You're just going, we're being the supportive friend at the bachelorette party. She doesn't want the stripper. Fine, let's let it slide.
I'm like, because 3 people didn't want it, so you was a little people pleasing. So neither here nor there. You know, I'll write it. I'll write it down. You know, don't need to share it. But, you know, I think sometimes because of who we are, we do exude this energy of talk to me, listen. You know, I ask people questions in a way. You know, my husband's friends, I get more information out of them than he's like, how? I didn't know that. I'm like, I know. And it's simply because of the way that I'm asking them questions. I'm like, brother, I'm so happy to see you. How was your dad? You know, and then we go down these things and I'm like, it's the way that I talk to people. And so they naturally open up and, you know, share, which is great. And then there are times when I have to say, I don't want to know this much information or be in this space. And I have to turn it off and set the boundary.
Right.
I have to figure out when I want to be available for those deep conversations and when I want to talk about housewives.
Oh, I love that so much. Our husbands would probably get along. It's so funny. It sounds like your husband is nice about it. Mine is like people do talk to me and tell me things. And I think he's always very surprised that people or he's not surprised. He's like, people just tell you everything. But again, I ask questions. I don't know why, but I don't like meaningless
conversation.
Chit-chat. Like, I don't like to just, you know, like if I have a moment to talk, like let's talk about something good. And so I do. I ask conversations, and sometimes people are like, it could be a little, you know, like random. This random person is asking me all these questions, but I still feel safe enough to where I'm telling her these things I haven't told anyone else. You know, it's a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
We totally digress. I want to get back to this idea that self-care, I'll use that word, and finding peace doesn't have to be this grand gesture like a girl's trip or, you know, anything really intense. It could be something as simple as waking up early to have quiet time or have tea by yourself, exploring new passions, like being a florist. What is it called when you're putting arrangements together? or watching an episode of Housewives, which I really appreciate. And I think that those are things that we can do throughout our days that are simple and easy ways to replenish and reset and find peace. So
yeah,
thanks for sharing that.
When I'm flying, my self-care, when the turbulence starts, I'm like, okay, let me go to the airline app and pull up Curb Your Enthusiasm because I'm going to start cracking up. I'm going to forget about the turbulence. This is the self-care I need in the moment. Like, I need to laugh. I need to be taken away. And so, a self-care practice is really what you can do in the moment. If the only thing I could do to feel good is to go on vacation, I don't have enough of a self-care practice.
Right. Well, exactly. It's not happening often enough. Okay. So let's segue into your new book, Drama Free. So wait a minute. This says workbook. Do you have a book and the workbook to go with? Okay. So let's talk about or share with us a little bit more about your new book, Drama Free.
Yes. So I have a book, Drama Free, and then I have the workbook, Drama Free Workbook. I think with workbooks, you get the opportunity to practice all of the things that are in the book. It's kind of like a therapy tool, whether you're in therapy or not. Sometimes when we're reading books, we're like, oh my gosh, that was such good information. And there's no opportunity to actually practice that stuff. So a workbook is really a calling to implement. What can I implement from these things that I'm learning? You do not have to read the drama-free book to use the workbook because people are often like, do I have to read the book? And it's like, no, you don't have to. If you don't want to read a book, it's enough information here for you to be able to open it and do some exercises and hopefully see some progress in your family relationships.
I love that so much. And I feel like everyone can kind of relate to the topics in the book about managing relationships in our families and trying to stay drama free. I feel like a lot of us are trying to navigate the drama and the chaos and the family dynamics. So please, everyone, if you have an opportunity to read Nedra's new book, Drama Free, or work through the workbook, before we wrap up,
I'm sorry.
And don't do it fast.
Don't do it fast.
Take
I think
your
sometimes
time.
With workbooks, we're like so ready to get things done that we're trying to like move through the workbook like we're running down the street. And it's like a page a day.
A page a day. It's like you're journaling.
A page a day,
like you're
a page
journaling.
or two. Yeah, like
at the end of the night.
It's not anything to rush. Your life doesn't have to be fast. Just ease into the workbook, do a little bit of the work, and move on. You're not going to get any extra points for finishing first. This isn't a class, so take your time.
Okay, I love that. Before we wrap up, well, first of all, I've been sitting here trying not to ask you every question that came to mind and trying not to just totally take this conversation places it didn't need to go, because I feel very connected and I appreciate all the work that you're doing. And I'm really grateful that you came and joined us and graced us with your Nedra Nuggets here today. I like to end each podcast episode asking one of my Do Tell card game questions. What does living a happy life mean to you?
Wow, that's a moving target question. I think right now having good health, happy kids who can laugh and open up and share, a warm home and, healthy relationship with my loved ones. That's what happiness is today.
Mic drop. I appreciate you coming. For those of you who want to listen to Nedra's podcast, it's called You Need to Hear This. You have all the best. Do you come up with all these titles on your own?
I do.
They're so good. Minding My Own Business. You Need to Hear This. The Drama-Free Workbook. And everything else that you can find in the description, because it's too much for me to remember off the top of my head.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here with us. This was amazing.
You're welcome.